Walter Green was not the kind of man people noticed. To most, he was just an aging factory worker with a limp, a tired face, and clothes worn thin by decades of labor. But on a freezing winter night, when the streets smelled of smoke and steel and the wind cut through coats like knives, he stumbled across something that would change the course of his life forever. Behind a diner, two children huddled together by a dumpster, their pale faces stiff with cold, their ragged clothes no match for the frost. The boy clutched his little sister as though his arms alone could shield her from the bitter air, but their shaking bodies told another story. Walter stopped. He could have walked past like everyone else, kept his head down, and gone home to his one-room apartment where the heater rattled louder than it warmed. His boss's cruel voice echoed in his head. "You can barely feed yourself, Green, don't waste time on strays." And it was true. His own cupboards were nearly bare. But as Walter crouched, his knees aching, and met the children's eyes that carried the weight of abandonment far beyond their years, he felt something stronger than hunger, stronger than despair. "You two got anywhere to go?" he asked softly, a silent shake of the head. Walter exhaled into the cold night, his breath rising like smoke, and extended his calloused hand. The girl's tiny frozen fingers slipped into his palm. That was enough. Neighbors would whisper when they saw him leading those children home. "That fool can't even take care of himself," they muttered. But Walter ignored them. Inside his apartment, with peeling wallpaper and a couch sinking in the middle, he laid out blankets, warmed a pot of broth, and gave those children something no one else would: a chance to be safe. That night he made a silent promise that as long as he had breath in his body, those kids would never sleep on cold concrete again. He had no idea that decision, quiet and unseen, would echo louder than any insult ever thrown at him. Life did not grow easier. Walter returned each day to the steel factory where the clang of machines rattled his bones, and his boss, Mr. Harlan, never missed a chance to humiliate him. "Even those orphans you dragged home probably work faster than you," Harlan barked, his voice carrying across the factory floor as workers smirked or laughed to stay in his good graces. Walter swallowed every insult. He bent his head, wiped sweat from his brow, and kept pushing through the ache in his leg. But the weight he carried into that factory each morning seemed to lift when he returned home at night. Eli, the boy, would greet him with a book in hand, eager to read aloud what he had learned in school. Grace, the younger sister, sat at their wobbly kitchen table, sketching houses that looked brighter than the one they lived in. Walter's cupboards were often bare, but he gave them his share of food anyway. When Eli's jacket tore, he stitched it together with clumsy hands. When Grace's shoes wore thin, he saved every coin he could for replacements. Sometimes, when the heater died and the air inside turned frigid, he pulled them close and told stories to distract them from the cold. Neighbors gossiped, whispering in corner shops, "He'll end up on the street with them." Others sneered at the sight of a black man raising two white children, muttering that they would turn against him one day. Walter heard it all but answered nothing. Instead, he poured every drop of his strength into teaching Eli and Grace not just how to survive, but how to carry dignity in a world eager to strip it away. He showed Eli how to shake a hand firmly, how to stand tall, and how to never let shame dictate his worth. He taught Grace how to count coins, how to face the world with her chin high, and how to believe that kindness was not weakness, but power. They were lessons born from his own scars, lessons he prayed would protect them in ways no coat or meal ever could. Years passed, and the sacrifices stacked higher than the coins Walter never seemed to have enough of. He worked longer hours, even when his back throbbed like fire and his limp worsened. When Grace fell sick one winter, Walter asked Harlan for a day off to take her to the clinic. The man sneered, "You're not their father. Stop playing hero." Walter ignored him. He took Grace anyway, knowing he'd lose wages he desperately needed. That night, when his pay slip came back cut in half, he folded it into his pocket and smiled at the children as if nothing had changed. Eli, with a sharp mind and sharper ambition, grew into a boy teachers whispered about with respect. Scholarships began to appear, the kind Harlan swore kids like him could never earn. Grace blossomed into a fierce young girl, challenging classmates in debates and standing tall when anyone mocked the strange little family she came from. Walter watched them grow, his pride a quiet warmth against the weariness of his body. His limp grew heavier, his shoulders bent lower, but he held on to one truth. Perhaps kindness was not wasted after all. Perhaps it planted something that would bloom long after he was gone. But what Walter didn't know was that Harlan's bitterness had only deepened. Each year, as Eli and Grace thrived, Harlan's hatred festered. To him, Walter's growing pride was an insult, proof that a man he had branded worthless had somehow stolen dignity he didn't deserve. And so, while Walter built a life of sacrifice and love, Harlan quietly sharpened his knives of envy, waiting for a chance to cut him down. The trap finally came one autumn morning. Walter returned home from another grueling shift to find two policemen waiting outside his door. Their uniforms were crisp, their stares cold, and a neighbor watched from behind her curtain, whispering, "I always knew he'd end up in trouble." The officers shoved past him, tearing apart his small apartment until one of them pulled a bag from beneath the couch cushion. Inside was cash and factory equipment stamped with company labels. Walter froze. He had never seen it before, but within hours he was in handcuffs, the metal biting into his wrists as Harlan stood by the factory gates, arms folded and smirk plastered across his face. "Guess kindness doesn't pay after all," he sneered, loud enough for workers to hear. A few laughed nervously, others just turned away. Walter was dragged into a courtroom that smelled of varnish and dust, his once strong shoulders slumped with the weight of betrayal. The prosecutors painted him as a desperate old man who stole to survive. Paid-off witnesses claimed they had seen him sneaking around the storage rooms. The gallery whispered, "I knew he was too good to be true, and even those kids he raised probably don't know who he really is." Walter sat silent, years of swallowing insults now chaining his voice. He thought of Eli and Grace, but he prayed they stayed away. He couldn't bear them seeing him like this, disgraced and broken. When the judge struck his gavel, announcing a possible life sentence, Walter's chest caved with the finality of it. Perhaps Harlan had been right all along. Perhaps men like him were never meant to rise above the place society shoved them into. Just as the gavel's echo threatened to seal Walter's fate, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Heads turned. Two figures stepped inside, not the trembling children Walter once carried home decades ago, but Eli and Grace, now adults shaped by every sacrifice he had made. Eli walked with a lawyer's confidence, a stack of files in his hand, his eyes sharp as steel. Grace carried a recorder, its red light blinking, her posture commanding as if the weight of the gallery didn't scare her in the slightest. Gasps rippled through the benches. Whispers swelled. "Those are the orphans he raised." And for the first time, Harlan's smug grin faltered. Walter's breath caught in his chest. He hadn't wanted them here. He had prayed they would never witness his shame. Yet here they were, walking straight toward him, eyes unwavering, presence undeniable. Eli leaned down, his voice calm but firm. "We're not here to watch, Dad. We're here to fight." That single word, Dad, rang louder in Walter's ears than the gavel had moments before. Eli turned to face the judge, introducing himself as Walter's defense attorney, and slammed a thick folder of evidence onto the table. Grace positioned herself in the gallery, recorder steady, ready to capture every word, every crack in the case. The silence broke like glass. Suddenly, Walter was no longer alone against the storm. The prosecution tried to maintain momentum, but Eli dismantled their case like a surgeon cutting away lies. Witness after witness faltered under his cross-examination. One factory worker who had sworn he saw Walter sneaking into storage stammered when Eli pressed him, finally admitting all he had ever heard were rumors. Another contradicted his own testimony within minutes, unable to withstand the precision of Eli's questions. The courtroom shifted uneasily. Murmurs spread as the certainty of Walter's guilt began to unravel. Grace then rose, her voice steady, requesting permission to submit a report. What she revealed shook the very foundation of the case, a series of documents detailing Harlan's history of wage theft, harassment, and falsified accounts at the factory, records she had uncovered as a journalist. The gallery erupted in murmurs, reporters scribbling furiously as Harlan's face flushed red with rage. The judge's eyes narrowed, tapping his pen against the bench as the weight of Grace's evidence filled the air. Walter, sitting silent at the defendant's table, felt tears sting his eyes. For years he had believed his sacrifices were invisible, that his children had long outgrown the lessons of his life. Yet here they stood, wielding the very tools he had unknowingly given them. Eli's unbreakable logic, Grace's fearless truth. The courtroom was no longer a place of his humiliation. It was turning into the battlefield where his children fought not just for his freedom, but for the dignity he had been denied all his life. The tension in the room grew unbearable as the judge leaned back, weighing the chaos unraveling before him. Eli pressed forward, revealing inconsistencies in the prosecution's timeline. Grace added context, citing interviews she had gathered from other workers who quietly admitted to Harlan's threats. Piece by piece, the image of Walter as a thief crumbled until only one picture remained clear, a bitter boss framing a loyal worker. Harlan's fists clenched white, his voice cracking as he shouted denials that only deepened his guilt. The judge's gavel struck once for order, his voice echoing through the chamber. "This entire case," he said firmly, "was built on manipulation." Gasps echoed through the gallery. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching faster than ever. "The charges against Walter Green are dismissed." Applause erupted from the benches, though some jeers followed Harlan as he stormed out of the room, his once unshakable arrogance shattered. Eli placed a hand on Walter's shoulder, steady and proud. Grace moved closer, her whisper trembling with emotion. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore, Dad." That word again, Dad, broke Walter's composure. His back straightened, his weary eyes lifting to meet the world as the weight of decades began to ease. Neighbors who had once mocked him now sat silent. Strangers who once whispered lies now clapped in admiration. Walter had lifted 2 children out of the cold, and in return they had lifted him out of a cage. As Walter stepped out of that courthouse, the autumn air felt different, lighter, warmer, as if the very sky had been waiting for this moment. For decades he had believed kindness was a quiet act, something unacknowledged, perhaps even wasted in a cruel world. But now he saw the truth. Kindness doesn't vanish. It plants seeds. Seeds that grow in silence, nurtured by sacrifice, until one day they bloom into something powerful enough to save lives. 20 years earlier, Walter had chosen compassion on a cold night when two children huddled against the darkness. And 20 years later, those same children returned with the strength, courage, and love to shatter the chains around him. This story reminds us that no act of compassion is ever wasted, no sacrifice ever forgotten. For every moment you choose kindness, you are shaping a future you may not live to see, but someone will. If Walter's story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of love, sacrifice, and redemption, then don't let it end here. Subscribe now so you never miss another story of hope that proves the human spirit is stronger than cruelty. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today and let them know. Kindness waits, kindness grows, and when the moment is right, kindness saves.